The sight of her in my white silk robe, the one my sister bought me for my wedding night, sent a cold, metallic taste into my mouth. It wasn't just the invasion of privacy. It was the sheer, calculated audacity of it. Evelyn looked up from her phone, her head resting on my pillow, and didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. She told me the air conditioning in her room was making a strange humming sound that aggravated her migraines. She said Mark told her she could rest here while I was out on my little boat trip. She even had the nerve to complain that the robe was a bit snug in the shoulders. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The rage was so absolute that it turned into a calm, freezing clarity. I didn't say a word to her. I turned on my heel, walked into the living area, and found Mark sitting on the balcony, staring out at the ocean with his head in his hands. I stood in the doorway until he looked up. His face was a mask of guilt and exhaustion. He started to say something about how she'd had another dizzy spell while I was gone, but I held up my hand. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I told him very quietly that I was going to the lobby. I told him I was going to speak with Diego. I gave him exactly one choice. I told him that in 1 hour, I was leaving this resort. I told him I was either going to a different hotel on the other side of the island where his mother would never find us, or I was going to the airport to buy a one-way ticket back to the States. He started to protest, saying we couldn't just leave her, that she didn't have a rental car, that she was guest listed under our reservation. I looked him dead in the eye and told him I didn't care if she had a hitchhike to the airport. I told him that if he chose her comfort over our marriage one more time, he should stay in that suite with her and consider our honeymoon the shortest marriage in history. I walked out before he could answer. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I found Diego at the concierge desk. He took one look at my face and ushered me into a small, private office behind the counter. I didn't hold back. I told him everything. I told him about the tracked itinerary, the faked medical emergencies, and the fact that I had just found a woman who wasn't my wife, my mother-in-law, in my honeymoon bed wearing my clothes. Diego was a professional, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of disgust that crossed his face. He leaned in and whispered that this wasn't the first time he'd seen a parent try to sabotage a trip, but Evelyn was a special case. He told me the resort group owned a sister property, a collection of private villas accessible only by boat, about 40 minutes down the coast. It was exclusive, it was expensive, and most importantly, it was completely blacked out to the public. Then, Diego gave me the best wedding gift I could have asked for. He told me that since Evelyn had insisted on being part of our family unit for billing purposes, he could separate the accounts now. He could move our remaining balance to the new property and leave Evelyn's room as a standalone reservation. Since she had provided her credit card for incidentals at check-in, the resort would simply charge her for the remainder of her stay, including the premium suite upgrades she had demanded. I felt a wicked sense of justice. She wanted the room next 2 hours? She could have it. She could have a whole floor for all I cared, as long as she was paying for it. I went back to the suite 45 minutes later. Mark was standing in the middle of the room with 2 suitcases packed. He looked like he'd been crying, but he was standing by the door, away from the bedroom where Evelyn was still presumably nesting. He told me he was sorry. He said he'd seen the look in my eyes and realized he was losing me. He said he'd told his mother she needed to go back to her own room because we were heading to a late-night private dinner. It was a lie, but it was a start. We didn't wait for her to come out. We didn't leave a note. Diego had a bellhop meet us at the service entrance to avoid the lobby. We moved like thieves in the night, hauling our bags down a service corridor and out toward the private docks. As we reached the water, my phone began to vibrate in my pocket. Then Mark's phone started. Then mine again. Evelyn had clearly discovered the late-night dinner was a permanent exit. The messages started pouring in. She was having a heart attack. She was being kicked out of her room. The hotel staff was being cruel to a lonely widow. She demanded to know where we were. She told Mark that I was poisoning his mind and that a good son would never leave his mother stranded in a foreign country. We stood on the dock, the humid night air thick with the scent of hibiscus and salt. The boat Diego promised was waiting, its engine a low, rhythmic hum. Mark looked at his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. I watched him, holding my breath. This was the moment. This was the line in the sand. He looked at me, then back at the phone. He didn't reply. He didn't call her back. He powered the device off completely and handed it to me. He told me he didn't want to hear it anymore. He said he wanted to be with his wife. We climbed onto the boat. The resort lights grew smaller and smaller as we pulled away, the luxury suite where Evelyn was currently throwing a world-class tantrum fading into a tiny of gold against the black hills of St. Lucia. Diego had handled everything. When Evelyn tried to follow us, she would find that we were no longer registered at the main resort. When she tried to charge her champagne and spa treatments to our room, she would find her own credit card being hit with the massive bill for the luxury suite she had insisted on occupying. She was stuck at a 5-star resort with no audience and a mounting debt she hadn't planned for. The boat ride was quiet. The spray of the ocean was cool against my skin, washing away the lingering scent of Evelyn's perfume that had clung to my hair. Mark sat next to me, his arm draped over my shoulders. He didn't try to defend her. He didn't try to make excuses. For the first time since we'd landed, he was actually present. He told me that when we got home, things were going to change. He talked about boundaries. He talked about therapy. He talked about us. I pulled my phone out one last time. I had a dozen missed calls and a string of texts that ranged from, "I'm dying" to "you ungrateful brat." I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. I navigated to her contact card. I hit the button I should have hit 3 years ago. As we boarded the boat to our secret villa, I blocked her number. For the first time in years, the only voice I heard was the ocean and my husband saying he was sorry.